Hey guys, it's Julian, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make hard rave techno like JKS Mayeul. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp, and yeah, let's get started. So, we're at 144 BPM, a little bit faster, but it gives it that more like aggressive, sort of 90s techno energy. The first sound we have here is this lead bass, which sounds like this. So here's the MIDI. We're in D sharp. It's a really simple progression here. You can see, like, it's literally just D sharp. So it's just C sharp, D sharp, and E, and then we have D sharp down here as well. Just like, you know, really simple, sort of like just sticking to the D sharp. And then you can hear it's like, when it jumps up, that's how you get that sort of more like quote-unquote evil sounding scale. It's just jumping up an octave and then playing that note that's one note up from the root and then two notes down from the root. And then what it really comes down to, in terms of making like a good pattern with this, it's very, very simple. But what you have to be able to do is just be able to like come up with an interesting pattern with it, essentially. Like, it really matters the arrangement of the notes, and like over here, for example, how we're getting that like just like exactly where you're sticking to the root note and where you're jumping up and down makes a big difference in terms of just like, you know, how nice this pattern is going to sound. Because it would be very easy to write a pattern with these three notes that wouldn't be as catchy and wouldn't work as well. So you just want to make sure to pay attention to that. And then the last thing here is you can see all the notes are a bit staccato, so they're not touching each other. That's how you get that. Like if I make this legato, it doesn't quite have the same energy to it. Now, for the sound with this one, it's made with analog. So what I was going for here is I didn't want to just make like another, you know, simple acid techno 303. I've shown you guys how to do that, but this is very similar to another sound that you've heard in a lot of these tracks and a lot of this like molecule style of hard techno in general. So what it is it is just a square wave and a saw wave. The saw wave is an octave down. There's also some white noise, and then they're being detuned a little bit. And if you look at the square wave, you can see we have the pulse width turned up a lot, and then there's a very fast LFO on the pulse width. So if I turn that off and just make it normal, hear how it sounds a little bit more of like a video game type of sound, but then when we turn that up, that's what really gives it the vibe. Like, this is an important step. It's something that's often overlooked, but it's really important to get that more sort of like vintage 90s rave style of lead with this. Then we just have everything going into a low pass. You can see it's got a bit of an envelope, and the amp envelope set like that. And then we also have a bit of vibrato, which just gives it kind of more character and texture. Then we have this chorus, which is spreading the sound out, giving it a little bit of space. We have this EQ here, which is just meant to cut a little bit of room. Like, when you're distorting this, basically the way the distortion works is it's how much signal you're putting into the distortion. So, if we're using the EQ, we're essentially just turning down the volume of this frequency range so that it's putting less of that into the distortion, and thus you're getting more. Like, the distortion's gonna highlight more like the mid-range and the high-end, versus if I turn this EQ off, here it's a bit more muddy with that. So it's an important step. Then we have this overdrive and this drum bus. So here's without these. You can hear it's a very thin sound without them, but the overdrive gives it that push to really feel like aggressive. And then the drum bus really makes it like full and like a really fat sound. It's important. This is one of those type of sounds, like when it sounds really big, try to make it sound even bigger, because it just needs to like really hit hard. Considering that this is really like the main sort of synth lead in the track. And then we just have a high pass filter cutting out the low end, you know, making sure that it's not going to get in the way of the kick. And then we have this auto pan, which is simulating this being sidechained. So if you turn down the phase here, this will just affect the volume. And then what you can do is just put it on quarter notes and then set it to the saw wave and invert it so it's like going up. And it makes it sound like it's being sidechained to the kick, when obviously like you couldn't sidechain this to a rumble kick or else you would just never hear it. Then we have this little metal drone, which sounds like this. So this is just playing D sharp. This is just meant to add a bit of atmosphere to the track. You know, like maybe your intro would be kind of like that, and then you have a part where it's just the lead. And then you would have them both. But yeah, so the way that I made this sound, it's really more about the synth programming with this one. And it's actually a really simple sound. The key here is with the FM, and more specifically, FMing the first oscillator with a second oscillator that's an octave down. Because typically, when you do FM, what you do is you put your second oscillator like either an octave or 2 octaves up. You can keep it at the same octave also. But typically, people don't put it down an octave. But what happens when you do that is you get more of that like metallic tone. Like it starts to go away from just being like, you know, sine waves, and it really starts to sound like very futuristic and exciting. And I'll show you, like, if I put this up, but then when we put it down like that, that's how you get that metallic sort of thing. The other thing here is the detune here. If I get rid of that, hear how it's a lot more like flat, but then if I turn it up, it helps to, like, that's what's really adding that sort of like uneasy metallic movement to it. Speaking of movement, after that we have this low pass filter. And so what's happening here is I have this set just right there, and then I have the amount turned up a bit on this LFO. So what's happening is you're hearing like a very subtle and slight movement with this. And if you listen to it in the track, it makes it sort of like weave in and out of the background of the track, so that it's not just the whole way through, you know? It's a little bit more nuanced, and there's a bit more movement to the sound. And this is a really simple way to do that. It's just Ableton's auto filter, a little bit of amount turned up on the LFO. And there we go. And then I have this chorus, so that's just adding some space, as well as this reverb, which is adding even more space. Then we have this drum bus, which it may seem odd to use a drum bus on like a pad sort of sound like this, but, you know, you still want it to be really big and full. Like, you need, even if it's not going to be fat in the way, like, this lead is, you know, you still want it to be full sounding, and you still want it to be, like, the biggest version of what it is. And so that's what the drum bus is doing. Then we just have a high-pass filter. You can see we're actually cutting out a lot of low end, because if I turn this down, when you do that with the FM, where you put the second oscillator down an octave, it actually kind of creates a lot of low ends. So you just have to go through and cut that. And then we have another auto pan, which is just making the sound like it's sidechained. And yeah, then we have the kick. So this is a pretty standard rumble kick. I made this using the way I actually used to do a lot on here, which is using this rumble rack. And I've just sort of expedited the process to be just really what you need to make the biggest possible kick here. So what we have is we have our kick sample, which you can hear already has a bit of bass in it. I think that's a big key here, is that your kick sample, you don't want to just get a kick that's just like, you know, it needs to have that like, kind of like a little bit of bass coming out of it. Which is also, you know, being helped by this boom here, but you gotta look for a sample that has that, because that's gonna create a lot more like low end in the rumble essentially. So what's happening here is we have a dry chain, and then we have this chain down here, which is just the rumble. So what's happening is, here, I'll turn off all the effects here so you can see. So basically all it is we're just putting our dry kick signal into this delay. So that creates that da-da-da-da. Then we put it into this amp, which, as you can hear, you know, makes the high end sound kind of crazy in the mid range, but it also brings out a lot of the rumble. You know, it makes it so the low end is really like just big and full and, yeah, rumbly. And then what you do after that is you just low pass it, and there you go, you have just the rumble without all that like weird mid range and high end crunchiness. And then there's a little bit of extra stuff I like to do to make it really work in the track. So the first thing here is I just have it sidechained to the dry kick. You can see it's on pre-effects, so now it kind of ducks out of the way, because if you don't do that, like if I turn this sidechain off, here I was kind of just, but if I turn this on, you you get the kick, and then you get the rumble, and it's very clear that it's two separate things, rather than just becoming a big rumbly mess, essentially. And then, speaking of not becoming a big rumbly mess, we have this EQ as well. And this is something I typically do, like, on bass lines. Like, if I'm making a tech house track, or, like, a deep house track, or something like that, you know, you would do this on the bass line, but because this is the bass line, what we're doing is we're just cutting at 100 hertz. So 100 hertz is typically the room where a punch, or where the punch in the kick is happening. Like, that's really where the, like that real, like, you know, what really hits you with the kick, essentially. So if we cut that in the rumble, we're just getting rid of, like, what we don't need, and then we're boosting the lows. Because the rumble is really just about the lows, you know? It's not really about 100 hertz and up. So if we cut that out, then it makes a lot more room for the kick, and it just makes the whole thing a lot cleaner. And I'll show you really quickly. Here's without this, and then with it, so you can hear what I mean. And the last thing here is, when you're making a rumble kick like this, so you have your rumble, you have your kick, now you just need one last thing to sort of glue it all together, and that's what this drum bus does. So here's without it. You can hear, like, of course it is the kick, but it's not nearly as punchy or full. And then with it, another thing that the drum bus does is it kind of glues them together. You know, it kind of just squeezes them together into one. It's not compressing it. It's actually saturation that's doing this. That's just kind of filling in some of the harmonic space rather than flattening it dynamically. But yeah, it's just a great way to do that. And also this boom helps because it can bring out a lot of low end, and the transient knob here is a great way to make it, like, really hit. Because you need that, like, at the start of the kick. Or else it's not going to come through the mix. But yeah, then we have the percussion. So it starts with these rolls. You know, very standard, sort of like 90s techno-esque rolls. Just got these in here, you know. This is one of those things you really just have to use a loop to get it. Like, it's about getting one of those older loops like this. And you hear all the atmosphere that's happening there. You know, like, it doesn't just have a clap. The clap hits, and then you hear... Or like over here. How that's, like, getting louder. Like, you just don't get this just trying to, like, program this from scratch. You really just kind of have to use a little loop like this. But then the key here is essentially fortifying the loop. Because if you just use that on its own, it's really not going to do it. Like... That's really like 10% of it. I think a lot of people think that the loop is all of it, but it's not at all. Like, you really need to sort of, like I said, you're essentially fortifying that. So the first thing we have to do that is this open hi-hat. So that's just playing on the upbeats, and that is creating... That's sort of like, you know, giving you that, like, thing, and adding to what is already happening in the rolls, but now we actually have some high end in there. Then we have this little percussion loop. So what this is it's 3 percussion sounds. I'll turn off these effects and show you. It's this one, that one, and that one. And then what's happening here is they're just going like that. It's just this, like, super repetitive pattern, again, sort of fortifying what was already happening in that roll. And then what we're doing here is we're putting it through a bandpass filter, which is slowly moving, and then we're distorting that with this overdrive. And when you turn up the resonance, I'll turn it up even more so you can hear. Hear how it kind of brings out that tone? So there we go. Essentially, we're creating this, like, moving and evolving percussion loop by distorting this bandpass filter that's, like, just got the slightest little bit of slow movement. And this adds a lot of intensity to the track because, you know, it's just constantly going. And if I turn this off, it feels more like the intro of the track. And then you bring that in, and there you go. Like, that's that hard techno energy. So yeah, something like this is definitely important. It's adding a lot of intensity to the beat. And you can see this is also just going through some delay. You know, the delay makes it feel more like a loop and more alive. And then we just have some drum bus to give it an extra little push of fatness and make it hit even more. And then I just have a high pass filter. And then we just have this closed hi-hat. You know, that's just adding, like, even more high end to what's already happening inside of the rolls. And then we have this clap. And so this is a big thing with this style. Typically, they use a lot of these like distorted claps like this. So all you have to do is just take a clap, and then you distort it just with like an overdrive or something like that, and that gives you that like that just hits like super hard on the 2 and 4 there. And again, it's fortifying what's happening in the rolls. And then on the group of all the percussion, it's just going through a little bit of saturation and a bit of a high-end boost with the EQ. We really didn't need a whole lot. You know, these are already hitting pretty hard, but here's without this stuff. And then with it, so you can hear that saturator just gives it the extra push to really glue all these drums together. And then the EQ8 just gives it a bit of a high-end boost. You know, brings out that like sharpness in the drums. And there it is. That is how you do it. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. And also subscribe if you haven't already. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file and sample pack and MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video. It's available at the top of the description, so you can work with all this on your own and make your own tracks or just learn from it. It's all there for you. And yeah, thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.